I call the whistle.
Tēnā koe te mangai o te whare. It's my pleasure to speak on this, the second reading of the Substance Addiction Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Bill. I'm not a member of the Health Select Committee, but I want to acknowledge the work of the Health Select Committee because I think the substance of this piece of legislation is incredibly important, and I think a number of the issues that the Select Committee has had to deal with have been really well addressed in their Select Committee report, so I want to acknowledge that. In preparing for my contribution this afternoon, I found a document produced by the Ministry of Health, and it's called the New Zealand Drug Harm Index 2016. And what that particular report does is look at the social cost of drug-related harm and intervention costs in the 2014-15 area, and it's estimated that the cost to New Zealand is $1.8 billion. And that's the personal, in terms of personal harm, community harm, and the cost of interventions. So I know that they've talked about the limited number of people who've been impacted by this serious addictive issue, but those that are, the social cost per year per dependent user was estimated at $33,800, and the cost to families and friends through the pain and suffering that they also have to endure was estimated at $438 million. And the other telling issue or information that was communicated in this New Zealand Drug Harm Index was that the acquisition crime, so this is what users do to support their habits, was estimated at $140 million. So the context of this piece of legislation is incredibly important, and so I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to acknowledge that there's a group in Aotearoa, New Zealand called Matua Raki, and they are the National Centre for Addiction Workforce Development in New Zealand. And so when I looked at what they had to say about this piece of legislation, they said they've been crying out for reform for over 30 years. And in fact, there have been 3 official reviews and a Law Commission report, which has created this piece of legislation. So from their perspective, you know, there are a number of deaths that have been preventable. Obviously, in terms of the harm to family and community, that has been preventable. They see this as a way forward, and that the people who are most affected by this piece of legislation will be able to be protected from the personal harm that they endure. It will provide a better facilitation of an assessment of their conditions, that we will be able to stabilise the health and wellbeing of people. We will be able to protect and enhance their mana and dignity, and facilitate an opportunity to also engage in voluntary treatment. So they see this as a stepping stone. People who are severely affected by addictions, by being, I guess, supported through a compulsory system, that eventually they will be able to make decisions themselves about what is in their best interests. And so the 4 criteria that they outlined was that people have to have a severe substance addiction, that their capacity to make informed decisions about treatment for addiction is severely impaired, that compulsory treatment really is the only course of action to provide some resolution, and also there's a big emphasis on providing appropriate treatment for the person that has a severe addiction. They also talk about the definition of severe addiction, so what people actually have, or the kind of psychological place they're in. So compulsive use of a substance which is characterised by a neuro adaptation to the substance, a constant craving for a particular substance, unsuccessful efforts to control the use of that substance, and continued use despite harmful consequences, not only for the person who has the addiction, but also their families. So these really are people who are not in a position make decisions in their best interests. I was really interested in the number of submissions received by the Select Committee. So there were 39 written submissions, of which 14 gave oral submissions. And one of the issues that were really highlighted, and it's on page 2 of the Select Committee report, was about the clarification of an appropriate facility. And so I note 2 particular submissions. The first was by Judge Recordon, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, or his or her name right, where they noted that there have been instances where 14 and 15-year-olds were detained in police cells for 4 to 5 nights. And also the Human Rights Commission highlighted that under the current, or under the legislation, or the proposed legislation, that it was possible for somebody to stay in a police cell for up to 27 days if they didn't have a facility for this person to be held in. And so what has been very good in terms of the Select Committee process is that the Select Committee have been very clear that that type of situation or scenario will not occur under this new legislation, that there will be approved providers who will be able to provide for the person in the interim if they are not able to be housed in a treatment facility. And on reading through the Select Committee report, I think, as the Minister Dunn has outlined, that has been a very good recommendation by the Select Committee that this House will support, because I note that this piece of legislation has unanimous support with the amendments from the House. So this is another one of those constructive processes that I've seen this House go through, and again demonstrated by the Health Select Committee. And I'm also heartened, I guess, to see that there's also the right for a person to get a second opinion. So even though they may have been or fit the criteria for somebody who has or falls under the compulsory assessment and treatment, that it allows for the person to get a second opinion, and also for the patient to get advice from a lawyer. So from my perspective, there's a whole lot of safeguards within this legislation that not only supports the person through a particular addictive episode, but ensures that there are safeguards and that there are people who have their best interests at heart throughout the process, that are they're not the clinicians, but they're people providing oversight. So I'm reassured, and I think the House should be reassured, that nobody is going to be captured by this legislation that doesn't need the support of the state and doesn't need treatment options, because it's really the only way we're going to address the addictive issues that they've displayed. So I want to congratulate the Health Select Committee again and commend the bill to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Barbara Kuriga.